no longer in their grasp. And yet life continues. Adam and Eve, life outside the garden. Famous painting here where the angel turns them away from the tree of life and in shame leave the presence of God. Chapter 4 picks up. And almost immediately we hear that Adam and Eve conceive a child. In fact, they conceive 2 sons in short order. And what we find is that the brokenness of all this stuff we just heard about instantly transfers to brokenness in the brothers' relationship. Right? Both of them bring this sacrifice to God. One brings an animal sacrifice because he's a herder of animals. The other brings a fruit sacrifice because he's more of a farmer type. And in the process, one of them becomes jealous of the other. The one with the fruit becomes jealous of the one with the animal because, of course, animals become something that is received as sacrifices by God, but not so much fruit. And yet God comes and warns him. So right off the bat, here's where that verse of desire turns up again. He says to Cain, who's angry with his brother Abel, beware, the sin's desire is to have you, but you must master it. In other words, fight temptation. Right? Otherwise, if you get into temptation, it takes your life over. Cain doesn't listen to God's warning and kills his brother. And we have the first murder on planet Earth. First brothers end up in a murder situation. And within a few verses, another man's committing murder, and you just start seeing the snowball effect now. The one sin leads to the brother's sin, leads to this next one, and all of a sudden within a couple of chapters, it's just humanity is just racing down the hill of violence and destruction. Got to say a word about what happens next. Because next you get a whole chapter, chapter 5 of genealogies. So-and-so begat so-and-so begat so-and-so begat. At least your King James Bible says begat. And then you get like an entire chapter of that. And then you sort of get relief for a few chapters. Then chapter 10 hits. And so-and-so begat. So, I don't know how many people I've talked to said, I'm trying to read through the Bible, and just at certain, like, 14,000th begats, I just gave up. Like, what's the point? But here's the deal. The Bible keeps giving you genealogies. It just does. You get to the kings. You get genealogy after genealogy. You get to Jesus. And the Gospels, at least 2 of them, can't get you into Jesus' ministry until they give you this entire chronology. Luke, back to Adam. Like, what's the point? Boring. No. Yeah, for us it's probably boring, but not for them. And so we'll talk more about the genealogies when we get to Jesus and look at this and see why it's so important to know this. But here's the basic principle. In a world where every other religion has nothing happening in reality in a historical level, like it's all, mythical gods and Mount Olympus and somewhere up there, and Marduk's killing somebody somewhere, like these. This God works in real history with real people. And that for the Jews means everything. Everything's different for this religion. This God actually steps into our world, in our history, and works with us. So for their genealogies, these aren't just names. This is their progeny. This is their family. He walked with us. So we got to remember that what's going on for these people is they're saying, this God enters our world, not some mythical figment of imagination. So you still have to suffer through them, but at least remember that there's a point to this all, that these were real living people, and they walked or didn't walk with God, and we have the same choice today. We get to chapter 6, and now starts about 4 chapters of Noah and the flood. I'm not sure what to say about the first 4 verses of chapter 6. I'm tempted to skip over them.
Yeah, do.
If you open this can of worms, you don't know how how to put the top back on. Put it this way. Clearly, as you read those chapters, sin has been growing. And you get up to this point, and something is sort of like the final straw. It's the feel you get. As soon as these 4 verses happen, the flood starts getting prepared. Noah starts building an ark. What happens in these 4 verses is debated by a lot of people. And why I feel I can't not say anything is because in the ancient Jewish world, these 4 verses end up being written about in 36 chapters, like 36 chapters to unpack 4 verses in the book of 1st Enoch, which was one of these books written between the Old and New Testament. It's an ancient Jewish book that deeply influenced the 1st century Jews and the early Christians. In these 36 chapters, in this book of 1st Enoch, it explains these verses by saying something along this line. Before God created humans, he created angels. And some of these angels, he gave authority over the earth to protect the earth and human beings. And these particular group of angels are called the Watchers. They're supposed to watch over humanity and the earth and protect them. Some of them did that. Others chose not to watch over, but to violate. And the actual way this language comes out is that some of these angels basically sexually violated human women. And this was a common narrative line amongst ancient Jews. This had happened once in the past. And that when they violated them sexually, there was actually conception and birth, and what came from this angelic human terrible interaction were giants, or what we call the Nephilim in the Genesis 4:6 there. And these giants were almost like what were hybrid angelic human creatures. And so they were larger than humans, they were particularly violent, and they explain a lot of why things got so bad on earth, such that God had to basically wipe it clean and start over again. Now what do you want to do with that? When Greg and I teach our spiritual warfare class at Bethel, we spend quite a bit of time on this because this becomes the basis for a lot of ancient Jewish talk about spiritual warfare. Like, these things came to earth and they showed up and they violated this, and we had to fight them and this sort of stuff. But here's the good news. Whatever you do with that, these angels, according to this tradition, and according to the book of Jude in our Bible, second to the last book in the New Testament, and 2 Peter, so 2 books in our New Testament, talk about these angels. And they say that what happened to them is they were taken out of the system. They're not around and free anymore, but were locked up in prison with eternal change, waiting for the judgment of God. So, good news is, don't have to worry about this anymore. But the news is, even the New Testament acknowledges this did happen sometime way in the past, and it had something to do with why things got so bad that a flood was necessary to wipe things clean. So there's spiritual warfare dimensions involved even this early in Scripture. That's all I'm saying about that. The next few verses start talking about this man. Although violence is increasing and murder is commonplace and these hybrid creatures are walking the earth wreaking havoc, this one man is, quote, righteous and blameless in all his ways. That's a powerful statement to say in the context of all the sin we've seen. This guy basically is walking with God. Remember, righteousness is a covenant term. It just means rightly related. He's keeping covenant with God. That's what righteousness means, keeping covenant. So this guy's walking with God in relationship. He's not choosing to be king. He's letting God be king, trusting him. So God sees that and says, I got to start over, but I have someone to start with. And this is a pattern now we find through Scripture. Is God's heart is always to embrace the world, like creation. But one man, Adam, slams the whole thing shut. What does God do? He looks for a new Adam. Noah, I can open this thing up again. And then, as we'll see, very shortly after the fall, sin slams it shut again. What does God do? Abraham, a man of righteousness, opens it up, And he just keeps doing this through history. Moses, David, right? Finally, Jesus, he finds the one that will never close again. Because every other human being eventually, like, I mean, David's good, but he commits adultery and murder. Noah's okay, but he ends up drunk in the tent and other stuff we're not going to talk about. Abraham's a good guy, but he ends up lying about his wife to two different kings, saying she's not his wife, it's his sister, because he's afraid of his own life. So even the best people slam the door shut with sin, but not Jesus. And so when it's Christ, it never shuts again. This is going to be the final Adam. Right? So God starts looking. Yeah?
Can I just, one thing I've always wondered about is that, so there wasn't really any written word of God. So how did God communicate with Noah? How did Noah know there was a God?
Yes, very good question. As far as we know, there's no written biblical text at this point. Moses is yet to come, and that's when the first text starts. So we have to, I think, so it's kind of speculation here, how could God have communicated? I think Apostle Paul maybe gives us the answer. Paul says in Romans chapter 1 and then chapter 2 that here's two ways God always communicates to humans. One is, chapter 1 he says this, that what does he say? The visible creation gives us a window into the attributes of the invisible God. So basically, creation lets you know there's a God out there, and that he's pretty amazing and wonderful, and someone deserves worship there, right? Some creator. So we at least know there's a creator, and that he's awesome and deserves worship. And then Paul says, chapter 2, and then for people who don't have the law, they do have it written on their hearts to some degree. In other words, we have a moral conscience in us. So there's a God who created, and I have a sense of right or wrong. Those two things anyone would have. Now, sense of right or wrong can be shifted by culture, that's true. But in every culture, there's senses of right and wrong. And Paul will frequently, so Paul will say, my conscience is clear. My conscience is clear. Don't violate my conscience. Corinthians, don't violate your conscience. Because that is a way God constantly is talking to people. Your sense of right or wrong. Doesn't mean your sense is always right, but at the very least, don't violate your conscience. The closer you get to God, the purer your conscience becomes, the clearer it becomes. But it never violated. That is the way God speaks. So I think probably you've got a man here who knows there's a God and is worshiping this creator and then is following what's in his heart about treating others right, not murder. And so it might be very basic, but he's doing what he knows. Living up to the light that he has. Good question. So, Noah builds an ark. This is Noah. No, not really. Who is this? This is Johan Hutters, who is a Dutch builder and who 20-some years ago got this compulsion to build an actual size ark and finally finished it. And so that's what the ark roughly would have looked like, near as we can tell. He translated cubits, which is the biblical measurement, into feet, and then figured that out, and this ship is 427 feet long, 95 feet wide, and 75 feet high. That's the best guess we have of the dimensions what the ark would look like. And then he turned it into there's a petting zoo inside. So that works. A restaurant and a movie theater. So, but he said the reason he did it is he wanted to challenge people to think about Scripture and God. So he's a Christian, and that's been his life's work. But that's roughly what the ark might have looked like.
And where is it?
This is in Holland, near Rotterdam.
When did he finish it?
I don't know the year, but it sounds pretty recently. Because, I mean, he's not that old. He's been working on it for 20 years. So that's a kind of boat. I mean, that would take a while for a guy to build back thousands of years ago.
How long is it again?
427 feet long. So here's Noah building that, which would have taken him years. This took this guy 20 years of modern power tools, right? That's a long time to look like an idiot. Not much rain, right? Talk about trust. And that's what God's after. Just trust. You trust me. It's always about that covenantal trust. And you trust God And eventually, God brings animals and lots of rain. And what's interesting is this. We've got to pick up what this would have meant in the ancient world. To us, it's just lots of rain, and that's a hassle. But in the ancient world, remember we talked about water as represented. Those are the hostile forces of chaos. So what's really going on here is the picture to have in mind is how God created is he pushed the waters back to create dry land. Well, because of sin now, he's going, okay, I'm stepping back. I'm not going to push the waters back. And the waters just naturally rush in again. It's God created by pushing waters back. He decreates by just taking his hands off, and chaos naturally comes in and takes over again. This is a point Greg's made in a number of sermons. When God wants to bring judgment, he doesn't have to do anything. He stops doing something. He stops holding judgment at bay. He stops Satan's powers from he just has to step back. Satan's there. To chaos is there. So the world is decreated. It goes back to its original state. And then God begins the drying process, which is, once again, God steps in, pushing the waters back. A cleansed land, you could say, comes out of this one. Now, there's a huge debate amongst Christians, has been for a long time, about this. Was the flood global, or was it a regional event? And I think in this church, maybe even on our pastoral team, we have differences of opinion on this. We look at this as an interesting opinion level sort of debate that doesn't affect much. What the Bible's concerned about, like what the flood means to the Bible, is that humanity that rebelled against God and had become so corrupt that murder was sort of the going rate, that society was cleansed from the earth. That could have just been Mesopotamian Valley, or it could have been the entire globe. We don't know how far humanity had reached by that point, what civilization looked like. Greg and I both, when push comes to shove, we believe it was a regional event, not a global thing. There's some really interesting data that's come out. In 1996, a book was written by two, as far as I'm aware, they weren't even Christians. But they believe, they found the evidence of the Mediterranean Sea about the same time that Noah's flood was supposed to happen, around 5,000, 6,000 BC. That something happened in the Mediterranean to cause the water levels to rise that ended up flooding over into the Black Sea, that then burst the Black Sea open and flooding the entire Mesopotamian Valley up to maybe 24 feet. And this would have functionally wiped civilization in that whole known area, from Sumer all the way, the whole Fertile Crescent, potentially, which would have taken care of what we know of civilization at that point. And so that's one way, possibly. We don't know. It's like someday we'll find out.
But you believe that the flood was a historical event as opposed to the debate about creation story?
Yes, yes. I don't think you can just go myth on this one. Why?
Yeah, what's the difference?
Well, because the creation text, as I understand the creation, like how you break the first few chapters of Genesis up, is I think chapters 1 to 3 is a creation text. But once you get chapter 4, we're not in creation text anymore. Now we're into what you might call primeval history, like ancient history. So it's a different kind of text now. Now, it's still possible that it is. It's works like the creation text does, but it is a different kind of text now. You're into historical stuff, not how God created the world, but what happened after he created the world. So it's a genre shift. But there's debate. It's always, if you don't know exactly what a genre is and how it works in Scripture, I think you got to be humble at that point and go, I'm not quite sure exactly how this ancient kind of literature worked or what the author intended. So let's talk together, do our best research, see what we can come up with, and
Isn't it just more important, though, that Genesis establishes the genealogy from Adam to Noah, and then from Noah's family to Abraham?
yes, which
And
is
it's really
10 to
not
5.
about any global catastrophe. It's about keeping that lineage
Yeah.
all the way, keeping that genealogy all the way, so we understand that Christ was from that original person, Adam. Does that make sense?
When you see those genealogies in chapters 5
I mean,
and
they're
10,
very specific.
Yeah, yeah, and it does, it connects right from Adam in chapter 5 to Noah, or Noah through chapter 10, and it's right 2 chapters later, there was Abraham. So yeah, that is definitely a key concern of those first 12 chapters. How much beyond that is something, again, and here's where it gets weird. Let's just say what the deal is. Christians had these conversations for centuries and never got too hostile about this. Because, like, I don't know, right? But as soon as the modern scientific world hit, and the modern philosophy and atheism, all of a sudden, a lot of people began to hear someone asking these questions as going liberal. Oh, you don't believe the Bible anymore. You think it's just myth, right? And so the culture you and I live in now lives in the aftermath of that movement. It happened around really, like, where it got really nasty was in the first 25 years of the 20th century, so 1900 to 1925. In 1925, there was Scopes monkey trial, which changed this whole debate, where until that point in America, you could count on most people saying evolution is not true because the Bible is, and that means a young earth, only a few thousand years, and all this stuff. And all of a sudden, the Scopes trial, although the fundamentalists won that one, within a few years, the whole country had shifted on that debate. And now the fundamentalists were the narrow-minded people. And you hit 1950s, 1960s, and all of a sudden, our school textbooks don't talk about creationism anymore. They talk about evolution. And now you can't talk almost about creation in the schools anymore, right? So this huge, massive cultural shift happens in about 50 years. And Christians who care about the Bible start measuring each other. Like, well, how much do you believe the Bible? And people start really judging each other about, well, I'm not sure it's global. It might just be regional. Oh, you don't believe the Bible? Like, yes, I do. I'm not, going liberal. I'm trying to understand what the scriptures are saying. So we got this whole context that clouds this for us, and this animosity. Just be aware of that. Because for some people, this isn't really about the flood. This is, do you believe the Bible? Kind of thing.
About, when Moses wrote the first 5 books, if we're saying that, let's say from Noah on, it might be more historical, was this all stuff passed on, do you think?
Oral tradition.
Generation, oral
Yeah.
tradition?
I think we have to say that. That is, back then, how most information is passed on. There's something different about chapters 1 to 11, right? The first 3 are creation texts pretty clearly. We're now in chapters 4, we're up here to 6. But to 11, this is what's called the primeval history. It's before Abraham comes. Now, Abraham we can date pretty decently to about 1800 BC, around that time, right? Then 400 or 500 years. Before that, we don't know how to date a lot of this stuff. This is way back in history. So once you hit chapter 12, everyone agrees there's a different kind of historical narrative going on there. What to do with 1 to 11, and that's where a lot of the debate is. But that's only the first 11 chapters of the Bible. Once we get to 12, in Genesis, everything else is pretty clear. Like, this is stuff we can talk about archaeologically, and we can talk about the Iron Age and the Bronze Age, and it fits with scriptural stuff. And, so, we'll quickly leave this problem behind. But it is a problem you need to be aware of, that how we do 1 to 11 is some debate. Here's the cool thing. So, major moment where God steps back, lets chaos come in and wipe the sin out, and then comes back in and parts the waters again, so to speak, recreates almost. And then comes to Noah. And now we have a second covenant right away, right? Sin, well, we need a new covenant now. So he comes to Noah, and he gives Noah 2 unconditional promises. In fact, he doesn't ask Noah to do anything for this covenant. Now, after the covenant happens, he'll tell Noah, I want you not to, let's stop this murder thing. He'll speak to Noah almost like he's a new Adam. Fill the earth again, multiply, same things he said to Adam. It's like this is Adam number 2. God's starting over again. But here's the thing he says, it's so cool in the ancient world. Two promises. First he says, my covenant with you is I'll never destroy all life on the earth again with flood. Never do that again. And we usually think that's the only promise, but it's not. This is immediately followed by another promise which has been very important in the ancient world. Namely, I will keep the cycles of nature stable and reliable for you. The way God puts it is, from this time forward, I covenant with you, day will follow night, and spring will follow winter. And see, for the ancient world, this is huge, because they don't know that. They're willing to sacrifice their firstborn children, in some cultures, to their gods, to make sure that happens. And our God just comes and says, that's a free gift. Unconditional. I don't care what you do, that will never stop. Just this beautiful, loving gift of regularity to the things that other people are wondering, will spring come? Let's burn our kids to Moloch to make sure that happens. That's what the pagans are doing. So God's just blessing. And then he says, I'm not just covenanting with you, Noah. I'm covenanting with all humans, in fact, all living creatures. We forget that the second covenant wasn't just with human beings, it's with all life, all animal life. So they care about the earth not being flooded and regular cycles of nature. So God's heart is seen for all creation in the second covenant, which means God always wants to open covenant up as broad as he can, right? Creation, was supposed to be Adam and all humans. Now start with Noah again, but I want to covenant with all creation. We sometimes get this idea that when God covenants, it's like just Israel or just Christians. It's like, no, he wants everybody, but he's got to come through somebody, right? He's got to start somewhere. So here he's starting with Noah. And then for verses of like 17 verses, he talks about the sign of this covenant. Anyone remember what the sign of Noah's covenant is?
The rainbow.
A rainbow. Yeah. Or is it? I mean, it is, but, and you might have to actually adjust your own Bibles here, which I've done, to remind myself. Because in most English translations, when you come to chapter 9 now, and you read about the sign of the covenant, it does usually say in our English translations, rainbow. And this is the sign which I will put a rainbow in the sky or something. Do yourself a favor and cross out the word rain there. Because the word rain there is not in the text. It's not in the Hebrew. It simply says, and this is my sign with you, I will put my bow in the sky. It's God talking. I will put my bow in the sky. Well, that is his bow, and it looks like that. But the word there, bow, is that. It's bow and arrow, archery bow, is what God's talking about. It's not a rainbow. It's a weapon of war, which makes perfect sense to what the covenant is. God is taking his weapon of war and setting it in the sky, which means it's not in his hand anymore. That was a symbol or a phrase in the ancient world that means I'm at peace with you. I'm taking my weapon, I'm putting it away. I don't have it against you. It's set in the sky. And so here's what's interesting. We think frequently, as we look at that, oh, how beautiful. And it is, right? And we think, oh, we're to remember God will never do this stuff again. That's not what the text says. The text says, here's God speaking, when I look upon my bow, I will remember my promise to you. Remember, who made a promise? Only God. There's nothing for us to remember and do. I mean, we maybe can remember God's promise, and that's nice. But the point is, God made the covenant. He's the one that has to be reminded, because he's got the thing to perform. Never do that. Always keep the cycles regular. So God says, when I see my bow in the sky, I will remember the promise I've made to you, and I will never again flood the earth. Makes sense covenantally. He's the one that promised. He's the one that needs the reminder, the covenant sign. Now, of course, you'd say, what, has he got bad memory? No, he's God. But the point is, he's showing us that he abides by covenant principles. The way he calls us to, he himself is willing to enter into covenant with us, as if he was one of us.
So the Hebrews, or the Jews, always have this understanding?
Yeah, and when you read the Hebrew, it's clear it's bow and arrow.
Really?
Yeah.
How did we end up with this
is it rainbow? Is it just a pretty story? I mean,
Well, no,
Was it first translators?
No, I mean, the word, why we get rainbow, why we call it that, is, Christian society is sense of, well, that thing that happens after it rains, that's the bow. So we call it rainbow. But that's just our own language that actually we lose the meaning of it. Because we don't think rain, bow, and arrow bow. We think
Okay.
cool thing that's in the sky.
So, no, maybe I'm not understanding it right. So.
No more rain with the bow.
It's okay if
No,
you
but I
do
mean-
add
No,
that.
but I mean, would the Bible have been referring to is that what we call the rainbow?
Yeah,
Is that the bow that God put in the
Yes,
sky?
yes.
It is,
It-
okay,
it is that.
It is a reminder to him
him.
of his bow and arrow.
yes, yes.
Okay, so it is a rainbow.
Well,
It is a rainbow, but it's,
yes, I mean, like if we said this today, maybe it'd be like this. If God is doing it today. And what I'll do is I will put my Uzi in the sky. Now, if we end up calling it a rain Uzi,